previous presentations, we've made reference to language, speech sounds, phonetics, phonology, phonemes, and allophones. Now we'll concentrate on each of these. Let's start with language. What do we understand by language? Language can refer to the concrete act of speaking, writing, or signing, like sign language, in a given situation, and the linguistic system underlying an individual's use of language in a given place and time. This is the definition that David Crystal gives in his book, A Dictionary of Linguistics and Phonetics. And in Gimson's pronunciation of English, language is defined as a system of conventional signals used for communication by a whole community. And what's linguistics? Linguistics is the scientific study of language. So, we've said that language is a system of conventional signals used for communication by a community. You may wonder, how is it possible for people, for the members of a community, to understand each other? Well, because they share the same code, they share the same language. When you transmit a message, this message is transmitted in two forms. In the case of spoken language, the substance used is phonic substance or human vocal sounds. In the case of written language, the substance is graphic substance or marks on a piece of paper. So, when you speak, you make use of conventional sounds, which you combine according to certain rules into an established system. The sound waves set up in the air by the speaker reach the listener's ear, and the listener will understand what's said only if he knows the language. They employ a linguistic code, and to understand each other, they must share the same code or language. So language is knowledge. It's a code which is known and shared by people who use their knowledge for transmitting and interpreting messages every time they speak. Language is a code shared by the members of the community where the language is spoken. Now, language is not merely randomly articulated human noise. It's patterned noise, sound with organization. When we study pronunciation, we do it from two different disciplines. Can you guess what disciplines they are? Okay. Phonetics and phonology. Phonetics deals with speech in its purely physical aspect. Phonetics studies how sounds are articulated by the speaker. It studies the acoustic properties of sound waves and the effects that these waves have on the listener's ear. Phonology is concerned with the way speech sounds are organized into a system, the sound system of a specific language. So, phonetics is general. It studies phonic substance. It's concerned with speech sounds as such, without any specific reference to their function in the sound system of a particular language. It's by nature analytical, descriptive, and classificatory. Let's think of a sound in English. For example, P. Phonetics will study this sound, and phonetics will tell you that it's voiceless, because when you produce it, your vocal cords are not vibrating, there's no voice. It's fortis, because we need much more breath force or muscular effort in its production because we don't have the support of our vocal cords. It's oral because the air, when you produce it, the air resonates in our mouth and not in our nose. It's not a nasal sound. It's bilabial because our two lips, the upper lip and the lower lip, are the primary articulators. And it's plosive. It's plosive because when you produce it, you hear some kind of explosion there. So, its phonetics is analytical, descriptive, and classificatory. Phonology is particular. Why? Because phonology will pick those sounds and analyze how those sounds function in a particular language. It studies the selection and organization of phonic substance into a given form in a particular language. So it's functional. It deals with the working or function of speech sounds in a specific language. Remember what we said in previous presentations. Phonology will understand how sounds go together to form syllables, how the morphemes are realized, for example, the plural morphemes. Phonology will study, for example, stress in each language, the rhythm in each language, and the intonation in each language. So we say that phonology is particular. So, we've been talking about messages which are transmitted from a speaker to a listener. So let's have a look at this figure. This is a figure of the speech chain. First of all, we can see two brains here. Two brains, the speaker's brain and the listener's brain. So it all starts when the speaker has a message to transmit. So what is the speaker supposed to do? The speaker is supposed to organize his ideas, his thoughts, according to certain grammatical rules and phonological rules. So this is the psychological stage and the linguistic stage, because the speaker is going to encode the message. Then, through nerves and impulses, that message encoded by the speaker will be transmitted to the speaker's vocal tract or organs of speech. The organs of speech, through the movement of muscles, will produce sounds. The organs will articulate sounds. This is another stage. This is the physiological stage or articulatory stage. Those sounds will be transmitted through the air as sound waves. This is another stage. This is the physical stage or acoustic stage. And those sound waves will activate the listener's ear, the listener's eardrum. And through nerves and impulses, that message will be transmitted to the listener's brain. So, when the message gets the listener's ear, we've got the physiological stage here, auditory stage. And when the message is transmitted to the speaker's brain, we've got the psychological stage or linguistic stage, because the listener will decode the message that was encoded by the speaker. And why will the listener decode the message? Because he will share the same code, the same language. So, the speech chain shows how messages are communicated from speaker to hearer through speech, focusing on the measurable physical properties of articulation, sound, and hearing. It's a chain between the speaker's brain and the listener's brain, and the whole process begins when the speaker has a message to transmit to the listener. and it takes place at different levels. So let's review what I've just explained. The first activity is activity at the psychological or psycholinguistic level. This is activity in the speaker's brain, and it's the linguistic stage, because the speaker will organize his thoughts and ideas into linguistic form. The speaker will do this by choosing both the correct words and sentences in accordance with grammatical rules and the correct sounds in accordance with the phonological rules of the language. This is the linguistic stage. The message is encoded in the speaker's brain. Then we've got the second stage. This is activity at the physiological level. The nervous system will transmit the message to the organs of speech, which will produce a particular pattern of sound. There's action of nerves and muscles. The organs of speech will behave in a conventional manner, and this will have the effect of producing a particular pattern of sounds. This is the articulatory stage. And finally, we've got the third stage, which is activity at the physical or acoustic level, because the movement of the articulators will produce disturbances in the air called sound waves, which are physical manifestations, and this is the acoustic stage of the chain, during which the sound waves travel towards the listener's ear. In the next presentation, we'll see what happens when the sound waves reach the listener's ear.